I didn't believe in haunted houses until I inherited my Uncle Albert's, a gloomy mansion on a cliff holding echoes of whispers in every dark corner. The first night, as the wind beat against the windows like the fingers of a mad pianist, I discovered a hallway that did not appear on the house plans. From the first moment I crossed the threshold of that mansion, an unsettling feeling came over me. The echo of my own footsteps in the grand foyer echoed like whispered warnings, and the cold air seeped through the cracks, carrying with it a smell of mold and forgotten secrets. The house, with its many sealed-off rooms and gray cloth-covered furnishings, seemed more like a mausoleum than a home. Determined not to be intimidated by superstitions, I spent the first few days tidying up the house and dusting off old family heirlooms. Every night, however, just as the clock struck midnight, the whispers would begin. They were barely audible at first, as if someone were whispering in their sleep, but gradually they became clearer, more insistent. One night, following the whispers as if they were calling my name, I found myself in front of a chipped door at the end of a long hallway. I stopped, hand on the knob, and listened. The whispers behind the door seemed pleading now, almost as if they were imploring to be heard. With a sigh that mingled with the frigid air in the corridor, I turned the handle and pushed open the door. What I saw there was not what I expected. It was not the end of the corridor, but another corridor, almost identical to the one I had just walked down. However, on the house plans, after that door, there should only be the outer wall facing the cliff. It was then that I realized that the mansion concealed much more than anyone could imagine, and that those whispers were just the beginning. Intrigued and somewhat disturbed by the appearance of this new corridor, I decided to explore further. With each step I took, the whispers seemed to become more intense, almost as if each murmur was trying to tell me a different story. The light from my flashlight cast long, misshapen shadows on the walls, which in their nakedness seemed to be watching me, participating in a conspiratorial silence. As I advanced, I noticed that the door frames were adorned with strange carved symbols that I did not recognize. They seemed ancient, perhaps esoteric. I remembered that my Uncle Albert had been an avid collector of occult artifacts and ancient mystery books. This hallway, not recorded on any house plans I had reviewed, might have been his most private sanctuary, a place devoted to his darkest investigations. I decided to return to my uncle's study, where he kept all his manuscripts and notes. After hours of searching, I found a journal I had not seen before, hidden behind other books on a shelf that creaked with the weight of wisdom and time. The journal was locked with a small padlock, but surprisingly, the key was there, hanging on a nail just behind the book. I opened it with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The first few pages were filled with observations and drawings of the symbols I had seen in the hallway. My uncle described these symbols as keys that somehow affected the structure of reality itself inside the house. According to his notes, he had discovered a pattern that altered the perception and physics of space, creating passages where they should not exist. He called it the architecture of the beyond. Armed with this new information, my curiosity transformed into a need to understand. Had my Uncle Albert really succeeded in manipulating the space within his own house? And what was the purpose of those whispers, which I now felt charged with an almost palpable urgency? That night, I decided not to sleep. Instead, I returned to the mysterious hallway, the journal in one hand and my flashlight in the other, determined to follow the whispers to their source, convinced that each secret unveiled would bring me closer to the hidden truth that my uncle had come so close to understanding, or perhaps from which he had fled. With my uncle's journal under my arm, I returned to the newly discovered hallway. Whispers, now familiar but no less unsettling, filled the air with a chorus of whispering voices, each trying to impose its presence on the others. I followed the trail of whispers, guided by the pages of the journal, which echoed with each murmur trapped in the walls. As I moved forward, I noticed that the whispers lined up with the symbols on the doors, each vibrating differently as I passed my flashlight over them. The symbols began to glow slightly, as if activated by the light, their outlines emanating a subtle but discernible glow. I decided to press one, the one most often repeated in the journal. As I did so, the wall in front of me vanished, revealing another section of the house that should not exist. This new area looked like a study, filled with objects my uncle must have collected from all over the world. Tribal masks with vacant stares, sculptures of mythological creatures, and shelves full of old books with worn spines. At the back of the study, a large oak table was covered with maps and astrological charts, and in the center, a strange artifact that looked like an astrolabe, but with unknown inscriptions and complicated machinations. The whispers intensified here, each voice seeming to concentrate on the astrolabe. I approached it and, almost without thinking, my hands began to adjust the spheres and rings of the artifact. The whispers became clear, articulate voices, no longer murmurs, but definite sentences. Release, discover, warn, they said alternately. Startled, but unable to stop myself, I continued to manipulate the device until a secret drawer in the table opened, revealing a set of handwritten letters. The letters were from my uncle to a stranger, discussing the danger of his discoveries. He spoke of doors that had been opened and entities that had been awakened. The end of the last letter was marked by an ink blot that almost perfectly formed the word care. With my heart pounding in my chest, I understood that the studio was an epicenter of paranormal activity, not just a place of research. My uncle had been experimenting with forces I didn't fully understand, and now those forces were aware of my presence. Looking up from the drawer, I noticed the air in the study cool drastically, and the whispers suddenly ceased, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. I felt an overwhelming presence, watching me from the gloom, waiting to see what I would do next. At that moment, I knew I had to make a decision. Move forward in search of answers, or step back and close this dark chapter forever. With my uncle's legacy in my hands, and the voices still echoing in my head, I decided to face the unknown. The following days, armed with reckless courage, or perhaps a desperate yearning for answers, I continued to explore the mysterious study and manipulate the astrolabe. Voices, now clear and almost human, began to narrate stories of ancient times, of doors between worlds that had been sealed by sages and magicians. They told me of my Uncle Albert, how he had stumbled upon these secrets, and how he had struggled to contain what he had inadvertently released. One night, as voices murmured an ancient liturgy, the astrolabe spun of its own accord, and the air in the study filled with a dim light. Before me, a figure slowly materialized. It was not my uncle, but an entity he had described in his letters. The guardian of the gates. His form was ethereal and fluctuating, as if made of mist and shadow, and his eyes glowed with an ancient knowledge. The guardian spoke in a voice that echoed not only in the study, but in my mind. "Your uncle left a great work unfinished," he said, "and you have inherited his legacy. But with this power comes an equally great responsibility." He explained that the balance between the worlds was now in my hands, and that I had to choose between closing the gates for good or learning to control the flows between the worlds, as my uncle had tried to do.
With each word of the guardian, I felt the weight of generations of knowledge and error. He showed me visions of what could happen if I failed, of shadows consuming the light of the world, but also of what could be if I succeeded. A new era of understanding and harmony between the natural and the supernatural. As the visions faded, and the figure of the guardian began to dissipate, he left me with a warning. Ignorance is a temporary refuge, and knowledge an eternal challenge. Choose wisely, for every door can be both an entrance and a barrier. Weeks passed as I pondered my decision. Finally, one cold early morning, with the certainty of one who knows there is no turning back, I turned the astrolabe one last time. The doors closed, sealing the passages and the voices. I decided that some secrets must remain hidden, not out of fear of the unknown, but out of respect for forces beyond our comprehension. With the study now silent, I prepared my uncle's letters and notes for filing, making sure his legacy was protected and hidden. I left the house, taking only the journal and the astrolabe block with me, symbols of a legacy closed, but never forgotten. As I walked the road back to civilization, I felt a peace mixed with a deep sadness, knowing that there were stories that should never be told, doors that should never be opened, and legacies that, though heavy, should be carried with honor.